Hi, this is Jeremy Jansen. Welcome to the November 2009 issue of Reason Wizardry. Last month I mentioned that I was thinking of doing a patch design contest for Reason Wizardry subscribers, and I'm going to follow through with that, and we're going to get that done this winter. So I'll give you some details on it now. I know it's a busy time around the holidays, around Christmas, so I thought of how best to do this so that people who are pretty busy could still have a chance to get their entry in. And what I figured is that 3 combinators is probably doable, especially if you have some time off around Christmas. So 3 combinators are required for entry, no more, no less. And these 3 combinators are going to be instrument synth patches. So there's going to be no effects patches, no sampler patches. The rotaries and buttons are going to be fully mapped on all 3, and I need you to get me these patches by January 10th, 2010. So once I get the patches and choose the winners, I'm going to talk about some of the winning patches in a future Wizardry issue. As well, there's some prizes. So the first place winner is going to receive a free refill of their choice from Nucleus Sound Lab, as well as a chance to create patches in a future Nucleus Sound Lab refill. And the second place winner is going to receive a free Nucleus Sound Lab refill as well. Hopefully this is going to be possible for a lot of you to get some patches done within that time frame. If you have more questions, certainly contact me about it. And now to get to this issue. We're going to be moving more in depth with audio and CV routing, kind of going back to what we started with in the September issue. This issue gets pretty advanced, really complex quite quickly. So if you have questions, as usual, don't hesitate to email me or post on our forum and we'll get it figured out. Alright, let's get it started. I'm going to be talking about the equal power crossfade first. The equal power crossfade is one of the most useful and fundamental techniques that you can learn when working with audio and Reason. It's not as widely used as you might expect, and I'm not sure why that is. I use it as much as I can in my patches, and I encourage all Nucleus Sound Lab associate designers to use it as much as they can. And if you're serious about sound design, you're going to want to use it quite a bit as well. So first, I'm going to talk about the alternative to equal power, and then we'll get into equal power itself. The alternative is called linear. And basically what we're talking about with crossfading is taking 2 sounds and using a modulator to fade between them. So in this case, we've got 2 patches from the recombination demo refill, Savior Pad and Spectral Square, set up in the rack. So I'm going to play a note, and you'll hear what a linear crossfade sounds like as we move between the 2 sounds. The problem with the linear crossfade is volume sinks in the center. So you have an issue where the fading just isn't smooth all the way through the entire modulation range. Just to clarify, a linear crossfade is extremely simple. It's just set up using opposite modulations in the mod matrix. We have rotary 1 for NNXT1's master volume, 0 to 127. And NNXT2 is 127 to 0. So that's all it is. Equal power is definitely more complicated than that, but it's not extremely difficult. Now, before I show you how equal power works, I should mention that I originally found out about this technique from Peth. And I'm not sure I ever would have figured it out without him, so I have to give credit where credit's due. And there's also an article on the Propellerheads website that goes in depth with crossfading, And if it doesn't quite make sense right now, or you want some more detail, I'd highly recommend it. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is add 2 line mixers. And I've got 2 identical sampler patches set up here. So the line mixers is what's going to do the equal power crossfade for us. And the reason it's equal power is because instead of using the volume knobs to fade between the sounds, it's actually using the panning knobs. The panning knobs have a different mathematical rule behind them, so it just sounds better when it's done this way. So to do it, we need to go to the first line mixer. Disconnect everything. Actually, we want to go to the first sampler here and connect it to the line mixer, but we want to split its sound between the 2 line mixers in the left input. And we want to do the same with the second sound, just like that. That's how it has to be for equal power crossfade. And now we want to take the left outputs from both line mixers and we'll put them into a mixer channel. So we're just using left output. It's like a dual mono kind of setup. Okay, now in the mod matrix, we want to go for rotary 2 and go channel 1 pan, leave that at default. Once again, now channel 2 pan and make it the opposite. Now we're going to do that identical for the second line mixer. I used to always forget the order here, but it's actually not that complex. Like I said, it's identical between the 2 line mixers. Oh, just made a small mistake there. And the first one starts off at negative. So if you remember that, you're okay. Okay, now we should be good to go. You can just see by looking at the mixer channel how it's much more even. And in the center position, it just sounds much smoother, much better. Okay, I'm gonna turn off that and we'll go back to linear and you can hear the difference. Okay, so that's just one really basic way to use the crossfade. There's just an absolute ton of uses for it. You could set up, say, a variety of different filters and crossfade between them. That's some of the stuff that I did in the filter research refill. You could crossfade between different effects. You could use 2 knobs and crossfade between 2 pairs of devices or effects or patches. So this could be our first crossfade and there could be a secondary crossfade as well. So it's just an extremely good technique to use and you're going to want to get used to it. And many of our patches as we move forward in Wizardry are going to draw on that. So Make sure you're up to speed with it, and if you aren't, check out that Propellerheads website that I posted earlier. A lot of the time when we talk about audio and CV signals, it sounds like they're completely separate. But actually, in Reason, oftentimes they can be interchangeable. Now, there's a lot of reasons that you might want to convert CV to audio or vice versa. And I'm going to just show you one of the reasons and uses for that right now. So the way that we convert CV to audio is using Thor. And so I've got a Thor patch set up here, really basic, with a pulse oscillator going into a comb filter. So now I want to modulate that comb filter's frequency with, say, LFO2. That's not really what I want. What I want sounds like this. And what LFO2 is giving me sounds like this. So you can see kind of visually there, that's because LFO2 is bipolar. It goes up and down from the original frequency. So we want a unipolar LFO, and I can actually get a unipolar LFO by converting this LFO CV signal to audio, and I'll show you how that works. The first thing we need to do is add another Thor. Okay, now we're going to go back up to this mod matrix and actually send LFO2 through audio output 3. So right there, that's all you need to do to convert this CV signal to audio. Now we're going to take this audio output 3 and bring it into the second Thor's audio output input 1. So what we want to do to make it unipolar is actually run it through the shaper. So this audio input 1 is carrying our LFO CV signal, and we want to send it through the shaper. We have a bit of a problem because there actually is no direct destination for shaper. But what we can do instead is send it to filter 1 in. Since we're not using this Thor for anything else, it's fine to just send the signal to an empty filter 1, which will then send it through the shaper and on out. Okay, so before we get there, we're going to need to take the output and bring that back into our first Thor. And we'll say audio in to filter 1 frequency. So that's completing the loop. That's bringing it all the way back as audio and now treating it as a CV signal that's modulating the filter frequency, just as we did before. Now let's play a note. I haven't turned the shaper on yet. We'll just make sure LFO2 is still working properly. Okay, it is. So now let's turn the shaper on. And we'll go to rectify. So you can hear the difference there. With rectify at nothing, we have a bipolar LFO. With rectify at full, the LFO speeds up to double speed and becomes unipolar. So that's the same effect as if I did this. So that's not the only use. Once we've got an LFO in here, we could use other algorithms in the shaper to change the LFO. Some of them probably aren't that useful. Let's just go through them. Wrap. Of course, you can fade in the amount of shaper. And remember, this is a sine originally. The sine shaper adds high harmonics, which actually speeds up the LFO very quickly. You can hear saturate clips the LFO and almost makes it like a square waveform. And that effect is also exaggerated with hard clip and soft clip. It's kind of a neat effect to fade in hard clip because you start out with a sine and then you can fade right into a almost square LFO waveform. Finally, once you have shaper processing done like this, there's one more plus. You can use the amp envelope to control when and how the LFO fades in. So currently I have sustain at full. So that means the LFO is full at all times. But if I change that, listen to this. So now the LFO fades out after 4 seconds. Of course, you can use attack as well. So that's just getting started with converting CV and audio signals back and forth. Later on, I'm going to show you an extremely complex patch that uses this technique in a totally different way. Recently, I had a subscriber request some help building a stereo Trancegate in Reason. As I built that patch up, I realized that it would be a really great topic for a tutorial because the skills and techniques necessary to build a complex Trancegate really encompass a lot of audio and CV routing that we've already been talking about in Wizardry. So I'm going to pretty much build this stereo Trancegate from scratch, and you'll see how all of it comes together. So I've already got some stuff in the rack, but it's actually quite empty. I've got 4 Thors, and they're all labeled differently. We'll go into what they're exactly for in a bit. I've got some EQs in here, and they're actually only there as placeholders to help visually understand the patch. I find if I have a whole bunch of Thors lined up, it's not only confusing to look at for you guys, it's confusing for me to work with. So these kind of just split up the patch and make it easier to work with. They're in bypass mode, so they're not doing anything to the audio. Okay, so our sound source is an NNXT. It's loaded with Fat Pad from our recombination demo refill that's included with this month's issue. That's running into a unison, and the unison is being output into the audio inputs of our master Thor. And that's all that's really been done so far. The master Thor is going to the outputs of the combinator. So we need to tell the master Thor what we want done with those inputs coming from the unison. So we're going to say audio input 1, going to audio output 1. And input 2 to output 2 at 100%. So now we should be able to hear the basic NNXT patch since we have a completed signal loop. I'll just play a chord on the keyboard here. Okay, so it's working. There's no gating going on yet. So now we need to get into the gating process. And like I said, this is a stereo Trancegate, and it's going to be more complex than you might expect. There's a lot of ways to do kind of a quick and dirty Trancegate using Reason. You can pretty much throw in a matrix, have it modulate the volume of a patch, but that's not going to start and stop when you play a key. Basically, it's just not going to be what we're looking for. So that first aspect that I just mentioned, we want the gate to start, the sequence to start when you play a chord or play a key. So it's not like you're going to play a note and you don't know where in the gating sequence it's going to start. It's always going to start at the beginning. So to do that, we're going to get started here using the MIDI gate source. So that's going to be whenever a key is pressed. Triggering the global envelope gate. And we're going to turn off gate trigger here. That means that MIDI gate is going to trigger this global envelope gate every time. And now we're going to run the global envelope out. Our CV1 output. We're going to run that into a Spider Audio because we're going to actually need to send that CV to 2 different Thors. So we've got it split here. We're going to run it into the first, we call this pattern 1 left. We're going to run it into that Thor's modulation input. As well as the pattern 1 right. So these Thors are going to be pretty much identical except for the patterns that they're running, because with a stereo Trancegate you can have a different pattern for either side. So first we're going to take that input source and we're going to use it to start the step sequencer. Same thing on both here. CV input at 100, step sequencer trigger. We're going to go back to the master here, and since we're sending this global envelope out, we should shape it somehow. So what we want actually is no decay, a full sustain, and then a fairly long release. That's going to mean that when we push the key, we're going to instantly get that gating pattern at full, and then when we release the key, it's going to slowly fade out. So if we have a pad that's got a long release, it's going to keep gating as long as this release parameter is set. Okay, so now let's program some simple patterns into these step sequencers. Okay, we've got our step sequence inputted. We're still not going to be able to hear it yet. We've got to take that sequence gate and output that as a CV on both. Step sequencer gate to CV output 1. So we're going to run those both into the CV mix Thor. Open it up. And it's not going to make sense why I'm running through the CV mix Thor yet. That'll come later. For now, it's going to just go in and directly out. So now our CV signal is going to go from the CV mix to the master. Okay, now our gating is going to happen right here. We've got our audio in from the unison going to our audio outputs. We're going to scale that by CV1 and CV2. And remember where these are coming from. CV1 and CV2 are originating from these two pattern devices in these two Thors. And then they're running through the CV mix. Nothing is being added to them there yet. And they're coming into the master. So now you can hear the gating effect. And if I let go of the cord, you can hear the gate fade out with the cord. So if I adjust the release stage on the master Thor global envelope, we can control how long that takes. That just kind of cuts off. That doesn't sound good at all on a pad. So that's why we're using this global envelope, is to fade out the gating effect with the sound. Okay, so that's a start, but we want to go farther than that. it's nice to be able to control the shape of the gate. Right now, each gate slice is very abrupt. Sometimes you want kind of a rounder shape for the gate, kind of like a quick crossfade. So we can do that by using an envelope for each gate slice instead of just the sequence gate. So to do that, instead of sending the sequence gate directly to the CV1 output, we'll use the sequence gate to trigger the global envelope. So now each time the gate cuts in, it's going to be controlled by whatever shape we decide to use with these two global envelopes. So you can see what I've done here. Instead of the sequence gate going directly to CV1, instead it's triggering the global envelope gate, which is then going to CV1. So we'll listen to how that sounds and how it can change this gating effect. Okay, so that's with the low release. Very quick decay. So you can get many different flavors of gating now that you can modify the envelopes. And obviously you can modify both of them independently in stereo. So I can make this right gate very quick and have kind of a more airy style on the left gate. Things are starting to come together with our Trancegate here, but there's still more to go. Now we've got the basics of our stereo Trancegate set up, and I'd like to add some modulations to make it more useful in a combinator format. So one of the most basic modulations and essential modulations that we should set up is a way to fade the Trancegate effect in and out. So I'll just open up the master Thor here, and I'll show you that this is exactly where the Trancegate effect is coming from. We have our audio in going to our audio out, and that's modulated by these two CV signals, which are coming from the patterns, of course. So if we turn off this scale, we're going to have no Trancegate effect. Okay, so we can easily map that to a combinator knob. We'll use rotary 1, and we've got to scroll a long way down for the mod 12 scale amount. And then, of course, the mod 13 scale amount. And we'll set them both from 0 to 100. So we're set up there. So you can use this for kind of a partial gate. Sometimes you want that gate sound, but you still want the sustain of the normal sound behind it. So you can use intermediate settings to get that type of a sound. Okay, so following that up for another modulation to use the combinator for, I'd like to add another pattern. And that's where it gets a little bit complex and difficult because, of course, Thor step sequencers only have one pattern, and there's no easy way to modulate that. This is one of the drawbacks of using Thor step sequencers instead of a matrix. There's a lot of pluses to using the Thor step sequencer, but obviously the main advantage of using a matrix is that you have so many different patterns at your fingertips. But we can continue on and actually add another pattern that we can switch between. And I'll show you how to do that. The first thing we need to do is duplicate our pattern Thors. I'm going to move them down below this EQ so we're separated. So these are identical to our other patterns right now. The first thing we need to do is give them the same global envelope from the master Thor. That's the one that's being fed from the spider CV right here. So we need another 2 split signals of that same CV. So we've got 2 left here, but this outputs an inverted CV and we don't want that. So we'll take this split, move it over to there. And now we've got it in our first CV there and another one. Okay, so now the global envelope that controls the entire gating sequence is being sent to our new Thors. And we're going to take their outputs and put them into the CV mix Thor. Okay, now just to differentiate between the two, I'm actually not going to program a new sequence. I'm going to just switch it to triplets. So it'll be the same sequence in triplets. Of course, we could program a completely new sequence if we wanted to. So now we're going to go into the CV mix Thor, and I'm going to show you why we're using it. So right now we've got 2 CVs coming in, 2 CVs going out. Now there's a few different ways we could crossfade between these 2 sets of CVs, but I'm going to show you something that ties in with this entire episode. We can actually use the same audio crossfade technique that I've already showed you to crossfade between CV signals. It's kind of hard to understand at first, but it does work. So the first thing we're going to do is bring in our other CVs. So we have the first 2 that are coming from our original 2 pattern Thors, and then 3 and 4 are coming from the newly duplicated patterns that are running triplets. So instead of outputting the CVs directly, we're going to output them to audio. It doesn't seem like this would work, but it does. It's a testament to the strength of Reason's modular design that you can do this kind of thing. Okay, so now we're going to do a crossfade just as before. We're going to bring in 2 line mixers. And we're going to take the audio output from our CV mix Thor. And then take the left outputs from both line mixers and bring them back into the CV mix Thor as audio. It's pretty crazy. I wasn't sure if this was possible either, but it is, and it's just by far the most elegant way to deal with it. Okay, we haven't set up the crossfade in the combinator yet, but we'll first set up it here in the mod matrix. What's going to happen? So audio input 1 is going to go to CV output 1, and audio input 2 to CV output 2. So essentially what we're doing is getting all these CV sources in from the sequencers, outputting them as audio into these 2 crossfading mixers, which is going to get brought back in as audio and then out as CV. And that's going to determine which pattern is playing. Okay, so now let's get into our combinator and do up these line mixers. I'm going to do this quickly since you've seen it before. Okay, that's our first. And there we have it. That's our triplet sequence. So I'm going to just program a different pattern in here so it's just a little bit easier to hear the crossfade between the 2 patterns. And I'm going to also modify the release time of each gate slice. So your patterns can not only be different in their sequences, but they can have obviously different gate slice settings using their independent global envelopes. So now there we have our original 16th note sequence, and then our 8th triplet sequence, which is different both in content and in gating slice envelopes. Another nice modulation might be changing the sequences from 16th to triplets. and then modifying the decay and release time perhaps. So there's lots of different things you can now add to all the pattern Thors to change the way that they sound. And then of course you have the main depth parameter. So just to wrap up here, I've got a few more things I've added to the combinator. I've kind of fast forwarded through that because it's not that much fun to watch all these very similar combinator modulations being added. Basically what I've done for our 4 different pattern Thors, I've gone Rotary 3 controls their global envelope decay, and Rotary 4 controls their synced rate. So they're all exactly the same. And the result of that is so of course, if you liked, you could tune all their decays slightly differently, but this is just one nice way to control everything. And then of course the synced rate. And finally, I've added a simple multi-tap delay on button 1. That does it for the stereo Trancegate tutorial. You've got 3 buttons left here, and I'm sure you can find some great uses for them. That brings us to the end of the November 2009 issue of Reason Wizardry. If you have questions about this issue, as usual, please contact me. So until next time, cheers.